Hello, everyone. Wow, it's pretty full. Cool. Thanks for coming, guys. My name's Jimmy. I make music on computers, and I'm from California. I moved here about 1 month before Corona. I moved here specifically for making music, and just do a quick background. Basically, this track is it's called Pyrolysis. It was released a couple months ago on a label in Berlin. It's called Stil for Talent. Has anyone heard of this label? Or yeah. So when I came here, they're one of my focuses. I really like their music. I was at Burning Man a couple years ago, and this was in California, and I never listened to really much club dance or electronic music at all. Hello, and was listening to more like chill kind of indie electronica, and then I went to Burning Man, found some deep techno in the desert, and really got pulled into it. So it was a lot of those same artists when I looked them up, like Oliver Koletsky and Sam Shore and Elfenberg. All these artists I found, they're all on the same label, and they were mostly based here. So I came here and got pretty lucky that they signed a lot of my tracks. I will play the track all the way through. This track was released on their latest compilation. It was their, I think it's 300th release from the label. And since today, I want to kind of talk through not just technical stuff, but also, I really want to open this forum up to more of like a discussion as well at some point. So don't be shy. I want to really get into the creative process, why we do stuff, how we get motivated, how to get into making something, because it's not always just about tips, tricks, and stuff like that. So that being said, I'm going to give a little bit of background for this. Picking it back up where I left off. When I moved here, I was really fortunate. They signed a lot of my tracks pretty quickly, and I was pretty excited. But after signing 4 or 5 tracks to compilations with them, I kind of told myself I wanted to work on different music and focus on an EP, but then I found out that they had this compilation coming up. And yeah, this was a couple months ago. And I didn't give them a track for this compilation, but then when I saw the track listing, it was like a lot of my friends on there and really great artists. So like, I think it was like my ego side was like, okay, like I want to get on this. So I made it in about 2 weeks. But at the time, and again, 2-3 months ago, I was at a kind of crossroads. I've been influenced by a lot of different kind of music since I've come here. Berlin has really messed me up in a good way. So at the point of before making this track, I really was wanting to explore a different style, but still give music to the label because I really like this label. They have an amazing mastering engineer, Stefan, who is like, his studio is just 5 minutes towards SAE, if some of you guys picked up your passes there. And so didn't have a lot of time, but I really wanted to get on there, and I thought, hey, I'm just gonna try changing my sound a little bit more away from melodic into this more liquidy style. And so this was kind of an experiment, but really, really excited about how it turned out. And I'll kind of show you guys what I mean. And this is context, right? Because again, we can all make music. We can all, we've all sat down in front of an empty DAW and been like, okay, like what do I do now, right? There's like a million possibilities. So I kind of want to walk you guys through my mental process before, and I don't always overthink everything before I start, Sometimes it's better not to do that. But this was very intentional. So at the time, I wanted to make different music. I was really into one artist. His name is Luigi Tozzi. Has anyone heard of this guy? No? Okay, homework, right? I know it's one class, but check him out. He's from Italy, and he makes this kind of stuff. So let's find a section. Maybe a little forward. can hear how there's kind of a wet quality to it that I really like. He's also a Capricorn. Capricorns. Any Capricorns in here? Ah, there you go. Yeah, right. See, right in the front, right in the middle, right? Maybe it's not an accident. So I did a lesson with him, but I really like, here's another track of his. I was really into this like wet texture. Just, I mean, this one's a little, this might be like a really, is it filtered? Yeah, see, I have an EQ on here. And kind of just applying that into my own sound, I got into something like this. Right? So, the first thing I'm gonna do is I will play this track mostly through. Let's see how much time we have, 4:43. Let's play it mostly through. We can listen to it first and then I'll talk about it, but I was making stuff much slower than this before, but I really was using this track specifically to kind of, on the texture side, get more into this wet feeling. So that was kind of my intention and approach, right? So before you start a track, right, we've all sat in front of a track, just 4 kick drums, you know, fire up your drum machine, or maybe you're just noodling around with a bass sound, you know, and then you finally record it. There's a million ways to start a track. There's no wrong way to start a track. Sometimes though, it's important to also have kind of an intention set. An intention is not the same as an expectation, because every time I've had an expectation, like, I'm gonna make the best club banger right now, like it never works out, right? So usually what inspires me the most is something I've been listening to, maybe something I was playing. Sometimes I jam, I play music with friends, we record stuff. But there's no wrong way to start, but it's sometimes important to have a clear, not an expectation, not a vision even, because you have to let the track breathe, but just having something to go off of that, like that energy can kind of continue or evolve as the track finishes, because for me personally, if I don't do that, the track without direction usually becomes, you know, it starts as A, it turns into B, 8 months later, I'm making the same track, but now it's C, D, E, F, and it's taken 8 or 9 different iterations, but it's never finished, right? So if that is any main topic today, it's kind of like how to approach your tracks, how to understand how those tracks relate to you, and then ultimately finish tracks, right? Because that's what we're here for. You know, we're probably not going to school or going to lectures to learn how to start tracks, but also finish them. But one of the biggest plagues I see plaguing producers is finishing tracks, right? Who here starts, or who here has like no problem starting tracks? Like, it's pretty easy. Who has difficulty starting tracks? Okay. Who has a harder time finishing them, right? This is the thing that you've seen, like, it's like all these tutorials online, like how to finally finish your tracks. You know, it's like, it's targeted towards us, right? Now, it's okay. I don't think anyone has a perfect 1-to-1 ratio of starting tracks and finishing tracks. It's impossible. You will always finish less tracks than you start. But I will kind of like, I'm just setting the table now, and as I talk through all the layers, I will kind of reference that to how, okay, this is where I started, how did I build on it to finally get to a certain point? But let's just listen for a bit, yeah? Let's just listen for a bit, and I'll also walk you through my session a bit. So let's just bump this tiny. Let's use the limiter. And are we mostly Ableton users in here? Who's in Ableton? Who's not using Ableton at all? Okay, all right, just curious. Let's go. I might walk around as well. Just curious how it sounds. we're having a little glitch. Struggling a little bit. Let's pause it here. I'll skip forward, but it's struggling a little bit. I wonder if it's CPU levels a little high. So it's basically this groove. It builds a little more, adds some melodies. Maybe I'll just play it like on Spotify or something. Because I froze all the layers. So we can kind of unfreeze them if we want to get into it. But you know, these tracks are long, so I think it's this one. There we go. You guys want to listen to it again? I was really trying to go for this broken synth feeling texture for this one as well. kind of use the ending really experimental. Yeah. So I forgot the ending was a little bit ADD. I just had too many ideas and was yeah. But yeah, it's always fun to listen back to it. That's basically the track. And I think we should just get into it, right? Does anyone have any questions before we start? Any thoughts? Was it okay? Was it good? Was it just kidding. Okay, so how to start a track. Usually, to be honest, I would say almost 90% of the time I'm starting a track, it's almost always based off of other tracks I've heard. I use references a lot. So who's using references in their mixes, productions, right? So if you don't, get used to it. There's nothing wrong with having a reference, even if you have your own original idea. Just having them in the session is really helpful, obviously, for mixing to compare it with. But for me, inspirationally, because a lot of times, like, I don't think, is anyone one of those people that like makes a track in like 20 minutes and it's done? Anyone? It's okay if you're that awesome, but not me, right? Not most people. So when you're listening to a track, you have ear fatigue. If I'm like who said it was a dope track? Was it? Yeah, yeah, it's dope right now, but after 8 hours, not really, but like 4 hours of the same, right? Yeah, psychosis sets in, right? You're, yeah, it's nervous laughter because you guys know, right? It's like, oh, is it still good? Is it, Mom, is it like, no, it's for real. And then you have no perspective anymore because you've been this close to the track for the whole day, you know, probably in a dark room, you know, probably not sleeping much, probably not eating too healthy, right? So basically the way to protect yourself from that, one way is I always have references, and obviously I showed you guys already the two from Luigi Tozzi are in here. And I use them more for an inspirational reference, usually when I'm producing, rather than really it's like a mix, like, okay, my kick has to like sit at the exact same, you know, dB level, or the frequency spectrum is the same. It's more of like, why did I even start this track before, right? Because if you're listening to the same loop a million of times, and then you listen to something else, it can just kind of reset that for you, you know, palette cleanser as well. So I really like to have just something in there, and a lot of times, one really effective way I start tracks now is I take 2 or 3 tracks that I'm inspired by, and I just try to like kind of make a baby out of them, because no matter what you do, like, don't worry about having references or being afraid, because you cannot copy another artist. I believe it's like literally impossible, right? Even if you tried to copy 3 or 4 tracks, like exactly, it's still gonna eventually sound like you, right? But it's something nice to have just as a railing, because I see where most people get really lost and frustrated, right? That's the most important thing, because if you get frustrated, you give up. Where people get frustrated is when they're sitting in a session with just their own music and you're trapped with like basically your own soul in the studio, and that's when people are like, okay, I'm gonna go home, or run out of energy. So references are good for that. One quick thing I want to talk about, just skipping over to workflow really fast. I always have references. Usually I'll have like 2 or 3 references near the top, right? And as you guys can see, like, why does this guy have like 20 references? These are all earlier versions of my track. So Pyrolysis, 6/29, so I guess, yeah, June 29th, June 30th, June 30th, point 2. I guess I worked twice that day. No, that's June, yeah, June, July 2nd, July 3rd. So I import versions that I worked on the previous day, right? Who has a habit of listening to their previous versions regularly, consistently? Few? Why do you do that?
To see the progress.
To see the progress?
Yeah, it's like any changes I may have preferred yesterday.
Okay, so do you guys compare it usually like the next day or after some time?
After some time, actually. Like
Okay. Do you guys have a process, like a week and as well? Same? You listen?
Yeah. I'm a bit of a weirdo, so like if I make a song, I literally listen to it about 20 times.
The same day?
Yeah, and then just play it through loads of different systems. But similar, it varies. Like it could be a week or 2, or it could be a couple of days after.
Who doesn't do that and just basically, essentially, you work on a track, you go to, do whatever you do, you go to sleep, next day, You continue. Who doesn't listen back? Okay, so sometimes it's something for me, right? Everything I'm saying today is basically my opinion, right? I'm not here like telling you guys what exactly to do, but for me, I've noticed that there's this notion or this idea that every day you work on a track, you make it better, right? It's a beautiful illusion, right? Oh yeah, I'll wake up like tomorrow and I'll make the track better, and then I'll work on it the next day and then it will get better, right? No. Like sometimes, and this is the frustrating thing with creative work, is that sometimes it's not like washing dishes, right? If you wash 1 hour of dishes, you always wash 1 hour of dishes. It's linear, right? Sometimes I can make a really cool idea, I can go to sleep, I can wake up the next day, and I can work on it for 8 hours and make it worse. Like, you can actually destroy it, you know? And that's why I started listening to my previous day's work as part of my morning routine, because directly after my session, there's no way. Like, I usually hate the track, like not literally, but I'm usually done. And he's laughing. Yeah, is that a beer? Is that? Yeah, they have beers here, alcoholic beers. Oh, okay, cool. Damn, I got a lemonade. Okay, yeah. So part of my process when I'm in production mode, it's production season soon, right? It's cold outside. Usually it's whatever day of work that is. If it's not going so well, I just do 3 or 4 hours. If it's going really well, I ride the wave out 6-8 hours. And yeah, by the way, this is a really important part of today for me. The ideas I want to translate is just the process and the approach. If it goes well, I ride out that wave. But eventually, at the end of the day, I make myself leave my house. I go see friends. I go outside, whatever. I grab dinner. I don't listen to the track this day for a specific reason, right? Why is it a bad idea to kind of critically listen to your track on the same day or right after the session? Sometimes.
Your ears get pretty tired. Yeah.
Exactly. You could listen to like, do you have a favorite song?
A lot of favorite songs, but yeah.
Do you have one you could just name off?
No.
Not quite. Okay. Do you guys know Feel?
Too many to pick from.
You guys know "Feel Good Inc" by Gorillaz? This is like my favorite song, I think. If I had to just pick one song, I love that song. If I heard that song 5 times, like even the best song in the world, at the end of the day, it's horrible. So usually I will put down my work, I do my night, whatever it is. The next morning, I'm really diligent about, I wake up, I take a shower first because I need to feel water or else I can't wake up. Take a shower, my body's warm, morning meditation, yoga, my body's stretched now, I eat breakfast. I eat breakfast first so that when I drink the coffee, as it digests, the coffee hits, It's all really planned. It's all, thank you, awesome, cheers. So that I can have a long sustained, because if you just like eat a lot of food in the morning, I get tired, right? If you only drink coffee, you will crash maybe, for me, after 2 or 3 hours without eating. So I have this almost time delayed thing with the coffee. So, and then I go on a morning walk, because now I'm stretched, I'm warm, I'm showered, I have my coffee, I go for a walk, and this is when I listen to what I did yesterday. Because this is the moment where in the first, 2 minutes, right, I know instantly, like, if it was good work yesterday or if it's bad work. And then I'll compare it to maybe 2 days before, and that's when you can critically listen and compare, okay, like maybe that tom beat that I had, the kick's going, and I had this boom, 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 boom. Okay, but that's actually fighting with the bass line that's also going boom, 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 boom. I didn't hear that the last day because I just came up with the tom beat and I thought it was the best thing ever, So it gives you some perspective. So I have become very religious about not only listening to my work the previous day, but importing them into my sessions. So let's just even see. It might be embarrassing. These might suck. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what like some earlier, iterations sound like. Ooh. Let's just turn this up. Right? Little bit different. Let's go further. See how the hi-hats are too bright? But these are, I think, all versions that were pretty close to the end. So maybe there's an earlier version. Let's see here. What's this one? Yeah. I guess most of these versions are more later in the process, so it's more of a mixing thing. But it's really important. If you haven't tried it, give it a shot. It really helps when we all have those days we go to the studio and we're like, we don't actually know how to attack that day. I think listening back to your own work is really helpful for the next day. Try not to listen to it too much during that day. Okay, so I have all my references there. How I actually started. So this track, I started it with the groove mostly. It's probably at the moment my favorite way to start because I used to just think I made electronic music, but then now, you know, after you live here, you kind of like make dance and club music, you know? It's something that just happens. And so the most important thing now that I want to start with is the groove and what is groove, right? But if you get the groove right, usually the rest of the track falls into place. If you can get the kick and the bass to sit properly, usually the rest of the track is easier to fall into place because you've laid the foundation, right? So the foundation of a good dance track is going to be a rhythm or a groove that makes you move, right? So what is groove? Actually, I'm curious, who thinks they have a good definition of groove? Got a lot of smart-looking people in here, but maybe we're scared.
Just something that keeps on running and keeps you dancing.
Something that keeps on running.
A very simple beat or any kind of constellation can be heads, can be pads, but that creates something that makes you dance because that's
something that makes you dance.
That's something that makes you want to move.
This for sure. This for sure. Because I've made beats like that don't make anyone want to move, you know? Like, and a big part of, so how do you make a beat that makes people move?
Syncopation.
That's a really great, what is syncopation?
Offbeats kind of, it's still stuck to a groove, but it's a little unpredictable.
Mhm.
There's unpredictability and space in between the groove.
Space in between the groove. That's really big as well. Who here's a drummer? No drummers in here. 0 drummers. You were, okay. Do you have a definition of syncopation for us? Not to put you on the spot, but I'm sorry. No? Okay. For me, groove and syncopation are heavily tied. For me, groove is, if I wanted to define both groove and syncopation together, I would probably say it's the relationship, right, between the fundamental parts of your beat and the external parts. So like you have your primary parts and your secondary and your tertiary parts. How they all relate, just the same way kind of like with planets, you have the sun, right? That's probably your kick drum. It's what's holding everything down. You have planets revolving around that, and then you have moons revolving around those planets. And they all move at different rhythms, different speeds, right? Yeah, that's a pretty good, that's a good analogy. So like for example, if your kick is this, and this is my kick, so let's just go maybe here. So I'll take off the top. If I just have my kick, by the way, quick sample, we have my top kick, my rumble, which can't hear too much in here today. It's more subby together. But even that has a little bit, you hear that little delay, that do. It's in the back, it's not just a straight, only a dry kick, right? There is a shadow to it. But that's just the 4 on the floor grid, but that holds us down. Now, the thing is, one thing that's really important to me when it comes to syncopation or groove, it's varying the rhythms, it's keeping it interesting, you're moving things off the beat a little bit. A lot of times it's about where on the grid your percussion is. And that's why I think a lot of times really good producers also like would recommend you to record your own stuff because you have the human error. If you record your own shaker, you know, we're not perfect. We're not going to be able to hit perfect 16th notes, right? So that human error, some hits are early, some hits are late, and that provides some swing as well. So these are all words that I'm going to be using a lot today. Groove, syncopation, swing, because otherwise your beat is going to sound just like every other beat on SoundCloud. And for a good ear, they're going to pick that out like right away, right? It's something that is, it's not easily noticeable. If you're not familiar with these concepts, Google is your friend. Look up these are really also very available terms. You know, look up drumming lessons on YouTube, and not saying you have to learn drums, but just watch the videos. Look up syncopation, look up groove, look up how to use a Latin clave against a 4/straight rhythm. These things are all going to help you produce these rhythms better, because at the end of the day, it's electronic music, it's in a computer or something, but it's still music. So cultivate your musical relationship as well. So if you listen, this straight beat, and then on top, I just have this very simple. And it's intentionally very dry, but let's just listen to what that does, because this is basic syncopation, as you will. Straight thing every time. We bring in the click. It's really simple. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 kick, 2, 3, 4 ba ka 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 ba ba ka 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 ka. All that does, that ka 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 on the up on 2 and 3, all that's doing is pushing the beat forward a little bit more. Because if you're not paying attention too much, it will get tiring. My basses and my percussions are always heavily syncopated. It's a nice texture, but you're not motivated to move forward at all. Throw this on. And so I'll just duplicate this. Everything I have today, I will just, most of my tracks are frozen, but I will just unfreeze stuff to kind of let you guys see how I did this. So I started this track. I actually made this track all the way through. And then this top, this little extra accent was one of the last things I added, because for some reason at the end I wasn't satisfied with how it sounded. And this like saved my track. It was like, usually this is one of the things that's at the very beginning. But I had this little liquid percussion as well. And while it sounds wet, something about having this just tied the whole beat together. So it's really cool, not super complicated or anything. Actually, I see that my head is going to be blocking some stuff. Would it look better if I make it more zoomed in? You guys think like a?
Try it.
Let's give it a shot. Like that, or something. You know, bigger. Yes, no? Yep. Yes, more, less? Maybe too much? All right. So, 4 on the floor beat, I went and I just looked for, by the way, I also released this track a while ago, so I'm also familiarizing myself with the track, so it's going to be fun to see what happens here. I have these samples. That's a kick. This is different kick, and we have this. This was the secret. So this is a sample that has, you guys see, there's this like almost delayed percussion at the end, right? If I move it up, right, there's that little and that's super nice, because basically when I play it, but I have it in gate mode, so simpler in Ableton. If you have trigger and you just play it, it will play the whole sample length all the way through, right? But gate is only going to play it as long as you hold it down, right? So I can play it all the way through if I hold the note, right? So what that allowed me to do inside the MIDI notes, very simple creative concept, is I just drew these notes longer. So this is the one with the kind of dusty texture at the end. You can extend it. So this one's longer. I can extend this one longer to hear the whole. And it's only adding a little texture, but if it was just all short notes and you don't hear that shadow, see how your ear is gonna fatigue. It's just not as interesting. It's subtle, but it's just not as interesting. This is the kind of stuff that I like. Because when you add this on top of the shadow of these, all of a sudden you have this feeling of space, you have this feeling of something's happening. It's not the same thing every time. So there's ear fatigue as it pertains to actual volume and your ears getting tired over the course of a day. Lower frequencies require more energy, and if you are always mixing or producing with a loud sub or a lot of low end, your ears will get tired super fast. Another kind of ear fatigue is repetition, static repetition. Repetition is good. It can be hypnotic, but if you have something that is too static, that is not changing, your ear will tune out like even though you don't realize it. Maybe you've shown your guys' music to friends before and they kind of just start talking to another friend or drop out. It's because the ear, after about 30 seconds to a minute of nothing really changing, the attention will eventually drift. It's just natural, right? So a lot of what I like to do when I'm building the groove is to have something like this where it's just an interesting foundation, right? Pretty basic, pretty simple. Any questions so far?
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you handle the low end? Because I saw your low cut at the EQ is on all three kicks at basically the same point. And maybe that's intended, but I would imagine that it would mess up the low end. But it sounds nice, so
Yeah, quick mixing thing. So you're saying how I'm like EQing them?
yeah, all three of them, because I saw your EQs are similar.
Sure. Let's take a look. I used to overthink that stuff a lot. Eventually, you realize that the first thing you were taught, use your ears, is actually just the best rule. I'm pretty sure I started with this rumble, so let's just take a quick look at the EQ. Usually when I see an EQ this complex, it's probably not a good kick. But I think that this is me not knowing how to give up on a kick, but this is too much. But I actually remember also this cut being very necessary. But let's just listen. It's just rumble. And I think the reason why it's so surgical and looks so intentional is because I think I just, with these rumble sounds, they really mess up a mix. Like a lot of mud everywhere. So I probably, if I recall, I started with this one and then this top one. And I think that if you look at this one, I basically have everything from about like 50 to 100, and I'm cutting around 200, which should fit. Yeah, this one's cutting around 100, right? So when you guys are layering kicks, I think one of the first things people will tell you is, okay, if you boost a frequency in one kick, kind of cut it in a different one. That's like a nice general rule, but sometimes all sound sums. So sometimes with an EQ, you can creatively, even though EQs are designed for cutting mostly, you can kind of make, there's certain resonance points that I do find appealing. So generally when I'm EQing kicks and layering them, EQ is your best friend when you're layering kicks, definitely. And I think just at the time that sounded good to me, and let's see, this is a more basic EQ, right? And this is my top. And I think when I take off too much lows, it'll sound too thin. Although that's also quite nice. This is probably how I would start now, is maybe a little bit, at least on these, right? So when I'm layering kicks, EQ first. I think, to be honest, I try to find creative ways to get away from it, but EQ can basically solve any problem that you have. And when I'm layering this too, it's not just, I know you said that they're similar, but
It's only the top one and the not rumble one. They look similar. But
yeah, I think in my mind, I'm also, like you're talking about these two blue ones, right? Yeah, I think that in my mind, they're kind of one sound in a way.
okay.
So see how they're basically layering, doing the same job, right? Because if you have just one, if I have just the rumble and the top, like that's cool, but it would have been a different track. and then just the bottom two hollow. And the thing is, for me, the approach is like, okay, it's easy to say, yeah, they're essentially, these two sounds are essentially the same sound. But what's essentially happening here is if you layer sounds properly with an EQ, it's the same as like saturation, right? Because what's saturation or overdrive doing? It's just adding harmonics, right? You're adding harmonic content. When you're distorting something, when you're overdriving something, you're just adding harmonics above the fundamental, right? So if you're doing that already, if you're essentially adding another layer, it's doing the same thing as far as what it's doing to the sound. It's just making it dirtier, it's giving it more depth. There's just harmonics in this sound that are not in this one. And if you're able to just simply layer them together properly, and that's the hard thing, right, is like people, I mean, I still do this a lot, but over layering, it's just, it can lead to a really messy mix. But if you're careful about it, it can really be really powerful. So, yeah, any other questions before, yeah.
Do you tune all of your kicks?
Good question. By the way, is my microphone on or?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh man, I must talk really loud because I can. Cool. So yes, I used to tune. Who's the question, by the way? Right. I used to tune all my kicks like religiously as well. Bye. See you. I used to tune all my kicks pretty aggressively and religiously. Oh yeah, you have to have your kick be the fundamental and blah. But then I found recently I'm less tied to that these days. I mean, as long as your bass line, like the music that I'm making, the bass line is your fundamental, right? The kick is just kind of like a chest sound. So, oops. But actually, the sub frequencies are actually the ones like with the bass. In my tracks, at least, the bass that's sitting lower. So obviously, the bass has to be harmonically correct, and it will be in a track. So that always usually comes through. And if again, depending on what kind of music you make, some genres of music, the kick sits under, the sub of the kick sits under the track, and the bass sits on top, and sometimes the bass sits more on the bottom, and the kick sits on. So actually, definitely in like techno, deep, or even melodic stuff, it's usually that the bass is sitting under, but in like, yeah, if you're making like trap music or EDM, or even some house music as well, sometimes the bass is sitting on top, right, as well. So whatever's the lowest, I think it's really important that that is tuned. But when I was tuning kicks, let's say like, I think this track might be an F. I can't remember, but let's just say it's F. Like I would have tuned, so most people would start with, okay, I would have my kick, let's say fundamental F, and then I would also tune, I'd tune that down F, and then I'd have maybe a bass on top or a bass under it. And they're both F. But we know when we're mixing, it's really hard because many times they will share the same fundamental, and that's hard to mix, right? So then what you have to do is you have to have an F from the kick or the bass an octave higher or an octave lower, right? And then what happens usually when you make one higher? What does it sound like?
Dissonant.
Sometimes. But let's say sometimes if I move my bass higher, it just sounds weaker. It's just not a bass. If you put the bass lower, like let's say, let's just take a look at the actual bass line here. I believe it is F. Let's see. Yeah, it's F. And so, does anyone know off the top of their head what, how many hertz F is?
44.
44? Looks like, yeah, you're about right. Yeah, 44, yeah. So I have this bass line that's not playing. Here. Oh, maybe when I was showing you guys the track, my bass line wasn't on. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it wasn't. So maybe it's supposed to sound better than what you guys heard. I thought something was missing. Yeah, that was missing. So, yeah, I was like, So, if I have my F here, already at 44, if I wanted to have my kick also at double that, so 80, 88, it's possible. It could mix. And I think that might have been what happened here. But one thing that I really like for deeper music, try it out, is I will pitch my kick a fifth down. It sounds really good. Who's done that? Yeah? Yeah, so it just sounds really good because it's a perfect fifth. Instead of sometimes an octave down or an octave up, it just gets too far away, because if it's too low, if we took this F from 44 down, right, to 22, you can't even hear it. It's out of audible range. But if you can raise it up to 88, all of a sudden your kick or your bass could just be weaker, right? But I will go a perfect fifth down. So what's a fifth down from F? F's fifth, C? Yeah, right? Yeah, C is the fifth of F, right? So F, the fifth of C.
From C, the G is G.
So like if you go up a perfect fifth from F, it's
If
C.
you go up,
Yeah, it's C, right? Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
Go up, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But what I mean is that C, I would make it go down. So I go down to C. So down 5 semitones. Does that make sense? So yeah, I'm like trying to, yeah, okay. So yeah, so what you have is a perfect fifth down, and because it's a perfect fifth, it will harmonically sound great, and it gives it just this deeper sound. I don't do it in this track. I wish I could show you guys an example, but it sounds really good because when the kick comes in, it supports the bass line, which is F, but it's not the same exact note. Because sometimes if you have this, it sounds really clean. It can sound clean if you can get the two Fs to sync up. But having it pitched down 5 semitones, it just has this deeper, because there's a harmonic relationship that is not sounding dissonant to your ears, but it's also not perfect. It's really great. So like every time I do this in a track, and let's say, you know, you have that section, everything's high pass, the kick comes in, the full bass comes in, it's a really full sound, because then you're not going a full octave down or a full octave up. It's still very round, and the two notes are much closer together. So one really great thing I would recommend trying. I didn't do it in this track, but quite good. Anything else? Yep.
Do you mean 5
Yep.
Do you mean 5 semitones?
5 semitones, yeah.
So not, because if it's a fifth, it could be different semitones. So is it a fifth down, or is it like?
It's pitched down to the fifth. So you could pitch up +7 semitones, or pitch down -5, right?
5
So
semitones down, or 7 semitones.
exactly, and both of those would be C, which is the fifth of F. And you know, yeah. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a different question. It's loosely tied to EQing.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that in your track you're using a lot of synthesizers layered with white noise.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that white noise can be quite distorting when mixing a track.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pursue that kind of challenge in introducing or mixing the track?
How to make it fit with white noise? So I think what you're talking about, I think I have some white noise oscillators in my synths. I think it's a lot of I think you're talking about like these sounds, right? Right? Like when they open up, when the filter opens up, there's a lot of, when there's a lot of, when the filters open up, there's a lot of white noise. And to be honest, so white noise is all frequencies at the same time, right? Personally, and I don't know if this is answering your question, but my approach to it is not like necessarily controlling that, because when I'm introducing white noise, I'm actually trying to introduce a sense of chaos and disorder and just frenetic, you know? Like anytime for me, when I hear white noise, whether it's like resembling a hi-hat, you know, or it's an actual like riser, it's like one of the easiest ways to create a little bit of tension, because that white noise, all those frequencies at once, to your ears, like when we would never really in nature often hear that like white noise where it's all frequencies at once, unless, you know, like there's an explosion or you're like at the bottom of a waterfall and you're hearing this shh. So your brains, your ears, naturally, because they're trained for survival, are used to hearing this the sound of all frequencies at once and relating it to some sense of tension or not even necessarily danger, but like it gets you excited, right? So when I'm doing this, usually if it's destroying my mix in some way where I have some delicate sound in the top end that I want to preserve, I usually will send that white noise to like some reverb or something just to wash it out, because you can't really surgically EQ. You could, it would change the sound, but like I'm not really attacking white noise like looking for offending frequencies specifically. Usually I'm just using that as a wash. If it's too much, I just usually turn it down or wash it out with reverb or delay. But in the moments that, and if I don't want it, I just don't have it, right? I'm not really trying to make it fit anything so much. Usually I like to think about mixing as a top-down thing. So I don't have a way to write it on here, but think of it as an upside-down tree, like a triangle, right? And essentially, the lower the sound, so it's frequency up and down. So the lower the sound, like a sub or kick, as you go up on this upside down tree, like you have your mids, and then you have your highs, your hi-hats, your white noise, your atmospheres, right? It's the same as a stereo. This is kind of a relationship to the stereo image. So the lower the sound, usually the more center it is, and then the brighter, higher the frequency, the wider it can be in the stereo space. So that's why for something like white noise, I'm very comfortable kind of just throwing it around. Like I pan the hell out of it, I send it to a delay, then send it to another delay that is going through a reverb. I actually have most of my sound, I guess if it's sound design in this track, is going through my sends. So let's turn this up a little bit. These are my send tracks. And that's usually my main focus when it comes to white noise and really bright frequencies. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes, it did? Are you sure? Are you being nice? Okay, anything else before we move on? It's hard to drink and talk at the same time. Cheers. Cheers to everyone. All right, so my groove's not done. I want to show you guys this. This was probably one of the most important parts of this track. And when you're talking about groove, we heard my kick. Ooh, there's my sub on. Let's turn this down a little bit. Ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Right? Now we're gonna bring this up. When I'm designing the groove, I start with that kick. It's the center of my universe. Then I put these little other syncopated percussion elements around it. Because again, I'm not worried about, but I'm considering how to make it move, right? So you guys already heard this one. It's more basic, but I have this little liquid percussion. Let's go maybe to the front. And these are just little bubbly, clicky sounds to make it feel more watery, because I don't know for what reason, but when I use claves and I kind of have a pretty resonant filter on it, it just makes things sound like they're underwater. And there's nothing crazy about this. I added some swing to it. I think I'm just using drum rack here. You guys can see in my MIDI. And these are just little perks that you can pitch, and you just make a little, who knows what a clave is? No one knows what a clave is?
I know what it is, but I just can't describe it.
Okay. So in Latin music, clave, it's like these two round little sticks, like imagine like a much smaller version of my thermos. And usually you hear it a lot in Latin music. And the most common beat is a son clave, which if I just play my kick, it sounds like this. Ga, ga, ga. Whoops. Let's just listen to this. Maybe we just listen to ga. Okay, that's 4 on the floor. Ga, 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 ga. You change it up. You can go on the upbeat. Ga, 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 dum, ga, 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 ga. And you just in Latin music you hear usually the clave is the most is regarded as the most important instrument in a lot of like Latin music with jams. It holds down the groove, and you can always syncopated. You can make up your own groove. So I have my 4 on the floor. I can go bossa, do ga, do ga, do ga, do ga, do ga, boom, ga, do ga, do ga, do ga, do ga, 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 do ga, do ga, do ga, ga, ga. Whatever track you want to make, right? In this track, I essentially have this. It's more heavy, but essentially in this track, this is my clave. It's more busy than a normal Latin clave, but this is just where when you're blending different styles of music. But the real emphasis is on this ga 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 ga. And a lot of times, for you Ableton users, I can't remember if I applied it. I'm pretty sure I did. Apply some swing to your rhythms. There's a reason I'm not going to talk about this stuff right now. It's because like technically you could go home and you can like just Google swing Ableton if you don't know it, right? It's a lot of tutorials online. But basically it offsets your notes to give it more movement and then a natural feel basically. I don't want to spend the part of the 2 hours giving kind of like a generic Ableton tutorial today. But that's the approach, right? You have your center, you have your focus. I have a little bit of rhythmic syncopation on top, because once I have that, then I can approach with melodies, I can approach with other stuff, because the foundation of my track is set. So that's nothing too crazy. It's a very basic EQ, and I have this like little bass pluck. I think I made this out of just, operator, super simple operator sound. Anyone can pretty much use operator, and it's just probably running it through some delay. Have a little boom. And they all add together because now the table is set, the setting's set, right? So the next part, usually by now, if I haven't, I will just force myself to look at the bass line. The bass line was made, I think, in Diva. Let's take a look. Let's listen to it first. And to be honest, now that I'm listening to the track, I probably would have made this bass line a little louder. But notice how also syncopated. It's not just like following or alternating the kick, boom, 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 boom. Like for me, that kind of stuff is a little more boring. And sometimes I'll turn up the bass a little bit. Sometimes if you can't really tell or you can't really feel the syncopation, because it's really hard to hear music really fast sometimes. But a lot of times my track is at 126 BPM. I oftentimes slow it down to feel that. So because when you're programming, sometimes I record stuff, but when I'm kind of like moving notes around, I do that still very often. No shame in mouse MIDI stuff. I will slow down the track, because then you can really hear the space between the notes if you really want to get that syncopation. So it's at 126, but listen to it at 100. that down a bit. We don't really need that sound now. We're not just arriving on the kick, but bum 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 bum. I never had a bass guitar teacher. I had a guitar teacher who tried to teach me bass. And the first thing he said to me is, if you want to play bass, your job is, as a bass player, harmonic propulsion. I had no idea what he meant. What is harmonic propulsion? And I'm still guessing, but basically what I think it means is, yeah, same thing. You're moving the beat forward, right? Because if I'm just playing a bass line, that is simply, let's say, bum, 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 bum. It can get boring. If I'm just on the note, ba-da-bum, 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 ba-da-bum. And you know, it's a bit really generic techno bass line as well. This ba-da-dum, 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 ba-da. You can do that. And there's moments and time and place for tracks like that. But when I'm trying to create a heavily syncopated track, I'm trying to really alternate between matching up with the kick, away from the kick, matching onto the kick, away from the kick, back to 126. Let's go further in the track. Okay, so this, something sounds louder, right? Did we turn? Yeah, we have two of these now. Okay. And then 1, 2, kick. And for me, what's interesting is like all of these different layers, syncopated, where if you're just trying to over-syncopate everything, it will sound really messy. But the different rhythms have to also support each other, right? So if you have this bass line, we can listen to my shaker. Do you see how they support? Metronome. Right? So it takes a little bit of time. A lot of these are, I'm not like syncopation like master in any way. A lot of times it's trial and error, moving notes around, but I always know that I like it when it gets to a point where all of these elements are syncopated in a way that I think support the fundamental groove, which is, again, this. And again, this is all like priority one, right? Like I'm doing all this before I'm really thinking about like melodically the journey or like atmospherically the journey. So now we have this. We don't need the click. The bass line. Without this yet. All right. So now I think by the time I got here, I think I was pretty satisfied with having that groove. Thoughts and questions so far? All good? Okay, so let's move a little faster. Actually, let's just also take a look at, oops. The next sound, I think I flattened this out. I think I might have recorded this on Micro Freak or something. But this is, I think, the most syncopated sound. I have to find an area where it's really, really loud. Again, pulling away, pushing, and pulling back into the beat. If we play it slow, I really like what something like this does to a beat. So for me, that's where the movement comes from. I added this layer, I think, after I had the bass line, because to me, this is like, it's not a bass. I actually EQ'd it very, very thin. I think I added quite a bit of modulation. Who uses Soundtoys stuff? Soundtoys? Yeah, they're the best. And Filter Freak. I think I was just moving this cutoff frequency around a lot. Let's take a look. Yeah. So like here. So most of that you don't even really hear, but I just add a lot of textures to the track. I think a lot of times people will warn you against, don't just keep adding more layers, you don't really hear them. But I think for me, most of the layers here were really intentional. All I'm doing is I have, it looks like a low pass that this is gradual automation. I'm just taking this sound, moving the cutoff filter around, and then another big part of the sound, which I think I will finally get into now, is my sends. So as you can see here, I'm sending over to, I have a delay, the Saturn delay. I'm going through an H delay stereo first. Let's see if I can find, what is this getting sent to the most? Maybe I'll display that with something else. Where is this one the highest? Okay, here we go. So this weird sound, you hear this? This, it's going here to this Saturn delay. I have on it, let's turn everything off. A lot of my textures and atmospheres are actually coming through my sends. A lot of my music now is coming through my sends. So first, without anything, you can hear a lot of different parts of my track going to it. Delay first, it's from Waves. Eighth note delay, and then I like to saturate the delays. This is Fab Filter Saturn. Oh, it doesn't get any bigger. It's a multi-band saturator. So with a sound like this, I'm setting the delays. I actually have it bumped hotter. Hurts, right? You don't want to bump the high frequencies too high. So I went from a very just the sounds from the track through a delay. Now it's in space. Saturate after. But once you blend it in, and maybe I want to make my track go back to the original BPM, right? This is just the send track, but see how it has this really crispy quality now? Which on its own might sound pretty thin, might sound a bit weak, but when you layer this harmonically on top of the sound, I think that's what gives it that broken quality I really like. And I guess we're not done. I also run it parallel through a Valhalla plate. That probably takes the really sharp edges, rounds it out a bit. Right? Like much more breathy, because before it was a little too sharp. A bit pokey, but once you run it through a reverb, it just soothes it a bit naturally. And I guess I have another EQ. And a copycat for just some stereo width. And I'm just ducking it with a kick. to the kick with an LFO tool. So pretty much, I usually also key map. So all my sends here, I have it key mapped to this number 5. If you guys don't know how to key map, also Google that on your own time. But basically this key button, you can map any letter or number on your keyboard to, just like MIDI mapping to any parameter in Ableton. I have all of my sends mapped to 5. So that basically I can turn off all my sends. So actually I want to remove the New York compressor because I'm not using that in this track. So I can listen to my track without any of my send and return tracks. Let's go to a main part of the track. See how it's a bit dry? Let's go, I think this has to be mapped as well. Okay. Okay, yeah, it's these two. Okay. Okay, now I have them all. So, without, with. So these are just my send tracks. And that's just like I have my track and I have this extra layer on top of it that's just enough to give it a little bit of texture, a little bit of crunch, make it more interesting than just a clean track by itself. So really good habit as well. Would recommend if you have, if you are using return tracks a lot, is just being able to A/B them quickly, because you always want to make sure that your track is sounding good even without them. See, that's a little stronger but a little drier. So all that, when I hit play and pause, like all that is basically in my sends. So let's just go through, I'll kind of walk you guys through my sends at this point right now anyway. Maybe before I do that, are there any questions up till now? Mm-hmm.
Would you rather recommend using the LFO tool than the normal glue compressor sidechain?
Oh, 100%. I think glue compressor is like my least favorite Ableton. I don't want to say least. A lot of tutorials online say use the glue compressor to, I can never get it to sound right. It's always, it always adds this like bit of mud that I quite am adverse to. You can use a normal compressor. You can use a glue compressor also for side chaining. But I highly recommend, whether it's LFO tool or it's like what's the other shaper from? There's also like the Nicky Romero one. There's like also volume shaper.
Shaper dock.
Yeah, there's so many just wave shapers. What I like about it is that basically, like you can just draw in the shape you want, right?
I have it, that's why I'm asking, because I'm maybe always kind of lazy to use it for everything, so I just put on a glue compressor and it's fine.
Yeah, for sure. Because like the thing about this is like it's literally like on the y-axis it's just volume, right? So how quiet or how loud you want it to be, and like there's so many plugins like this, and they all have different shapes. What you can do with this, I think, is just way more creatively liberating, because every kick is different. Some kicks have huge bodies and huge tails. Some kicks are really tight and short. So like if I have a really big kick, maybe it looks more like this, you know? If I have a really tight kick, maybe it looks more like this. Just like, if you use kick 2, just shaping your kick, I'm a huge proponent of being able to shape stuff like this, because, also you can be really weird. Like, sometimes I even just put, actually I'll even show you, I think on one of these other sends, I have a trance gate on something. Let's see here. No, it's not this one. I'm not sure if I do it on this track. But yeah, maybe I don't do it on this track. But I'll just do it on this one. So we have the normal Saturn delay. But if I just go to like a trance gate, it's just a preset. And now you have your delays and your reverb sent through an LFO tool, giving it a percussive quality, which I know sounds kind of weird and kind of crazy, but let's just listen to that with a kick. You know, it's also another just creative thing I didn't do in this track, but you can always, that's one thing I really like to do is like take my delays, because delays and reverbs are very like undisciplined, right? They're really just like, they just go everywhere. And if you cut them up with really sharp volume envelopes like that, you can add a really cool texture to your sound. And I think maybe against the kick might not have been that nice, but let's just listen to this. Maybe just with the bass and the leads. You know, just something different. I'm not even saying that's like good for the track, but just something different, right? Let's just initialize this. Here, let me just grab. All right. Where is my? Let's just reinitialize this. I always forget where the init button for that is. I always think it's the same place as Serum. Okay, so let's go to the dub delay. This is more of, maybe this is not as interesting in this section. I think this is more of a spacer. This is more interesting. Decapitator. So again, sound toys. I almost always now have at least one. I use a lot of saturation, especially on my Send tracks. It's just, I can't really ever quite get the color I want if I'm not saturating extra. Like even you saw when I was using delays and reverbs, that was more space to create a room with the Saturn, but I still will send delays and reverbs through a saturator because that's for me how I get the depth that I want. And this one is less about, this one's just purely saturation. There's no delay, there's no reverb on it, I'm pretty sure. Just the dry decapitator. Usually before I run into the decapitator, I will take, like right now I took the gain down 10 dB entering the plugin. Do you know why we do this? Anyone? Yeah.
Gain staging?
It is gain staging, but why before decapitator?
So saturation responds to volume or level, amplitude, whatever.
Definitely. I can't explain why exactly, if it's exactly this case, but the reason I do it is because most vintage gear, you know, like analog compressors, retro saturators as well. Most analog gear, outboard equipment, vintage stuff, they actually are designed to receive a low volume input. Like they're not designed to get hit super hard. If they get hit super hard, sometimes they respond extremely, and you'll hear how if right now I'll take the gain down here, but if I have it at 0 on the utility going into the decapitator, it'll sound more distorted, but not in a pleasing euphonic way. It sounds all right now. It's not that bad at this moment, but especially if it's on a track, when you send almost all of, because again, the plugins, the math behind it is designed to emulate this vintage gear, right? I think in this case, it's not that great of an example. If we're on like mixing monitors, it's much more clear. I also can't really hear it with this angle, but especially with the punish button on, a lot of times, the first year I had Decapitator, I would almost never use it because on the way in, my signal would be too hot. It'd always feel a little bit like you just hear these resonance points that are not something you want. And once I started doing this, basically where I would have, let's say, neg 10, right? And like you said, gain staging, if you want it to be at the same volume, I just have it enter neg 10 and then on the way out, boost at 10 so we're even, right? And again, I'm just using my ears. I mix usually with SonarWorks. And when I'm doing that, I'm just really listening to like how again, A/B, key map, make sure that everything's, the proper levels are the same, A/B before and after, how it sounds. I always get better results, having the signal not be too hot in the way. And again, if it's like a live recording, if it's already a quiet sample, you might not need to do this. But a lot of times, like samples that we get off Splice are heavily compressed and limited, right? Stuff that, a lot of times, even VST instruments, like they're already quite hot. And again, in Ableton, if you don't have I have my default track set to -6, just so I have a little headroom every time. I don't have to always turn it down. If it's at 0, signals are really hot. So then I usually will like to have it go in quietly, push it, right? And then mix this with a dry signal. So this wasn't here. So let's just do a quick A/B without it and with. It's a pretty big difference. And obviously there's going to be those of you in the room that say, well, you're adding volume for sure, but this is just for color. And I think here we have some reverb. I have an auto pen on there. I'm also modulating the rate. It's a Valhalla Shimmer. I really like to use it for this kind of angelic. Texture. And again, shaping it at the end. So reverb, EQ, panning. And lastly, I have a plate. I think here it's not doing much, maybe over here. All together. So all those layers, I think, are a really big part of making the track feel like it's sitting in a space. So yeah, highly recommend just spending more time, because I think a lot of times with sends, we often just throw a compressor on there, just glue compressor, drum bus, a reverb for some room. But try designing your sends, right? So you send it to a delay or a reverb, try panning that around. Try, again, right, also like the LFO tool, giving it a rhythmic bump. See if you want to send your delay back through a chorus or a flanger just to give it a little bit of weirder pitch. Try designing your room, right? Because a lot of times we think about sound design, we design our bass, we design our leads, and then we just send it to a reverb and say we're done. You can kind of hear that in tracks. Like, I like to spend now these days a lot more time also just kind of a little bit of creative design on the space itself. I think really gives everything a little swirl. All right. How much time do we have? 30 more minutes. Any questions so far on that? All good? Yep.
So when you put the LFO tool on your sends, are you putting it on just one send or affecting all of them?
Well, I actually have discrete for each track LFO tool. I guess I could route them all, again, to another LFO tool, but so if I have all my sends and I route them to one LFO tool, they'll pump like in unison. Yeah. But I don't think I really make the kind of music that is conducive to that. Like, that would be probably more of, I think, for a more mainstream genre, then all your sends are kind of pumping, against the vocal or something. but I like to have stuff that's, okay, I have like eighth note delays, I have some dotted eighth note delays going to reverb, I have some, okay, reverb just a shimmer panning slowly, so it's like, it feels like the room is always moving in different ways, just to keep my interest. So that's why usually each send has its own LFO tool as well. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Okay, so let's take a look now. We have the groove, we have the bass. Let's just take a look at some of the melodies. Ew. Let's take a look at, yeah, before we move on. A lot of times I do this. I have a Moog Sub 37 that I usually use for basses as well. Does anyone have a Moog Sub 37? It's just a really awesome synth. Check it out. But a lot of times when I wasn't really good at making my own sounds, I would do what's called a sample throw, which is like I would just smoke a joint and then I would go on Splice and I would just download all the coolest samples that I could find, and then I would literally load them all like into a session, like 60 to 200 samples, and I would just like throw them at the session in random places, and then I would just like keep what sounds good and remove what doesn't sound good, because when you don't know how to synthesize or create your own sounds, you don't want that to just stop you from making music. Samples are a good way to start. But now I'm essentially making all my own sounds for the most part. A good sample is still really nice once in a while. But I still keep the same philosophy of, it's the same as when you record, like you go into a studio jam, you record a bunch of takes, you just take what's good, right? So with the Moog, I just had, I think it was like a saw bass or something. Let's see. Right, and I just have these little fills that they're parts of longer takes, right? But I just keep the parts I need, so. So it's all here, kind of a similar sound. And for me, it's like we already have the main bass line, right? We already have the syncopated sound here. I don't want to muddy that up with another bass layer, but you see how essentially in the arrangement phase, you see how they're just fills, kind of like a drummer, right? When you're playing a groove, and then you want to push the beat forward, you can have a little small fill, small fill, or you can have a big fill. So these are all ways that I also keep my track from not getting too stale, because I make instrumental music. Today I had someone ask me to do vocals on my track, but I'm not so sure about that. But I mostly make instrumental music, and it's really hard to keep instrumental music moving forward. So adding fills, again, just kind of it's kind of like throwing paint at a canvas and seeing what sticks. And essentially all that is just my low end so far, right? It's like I have my kick, I have my groove, I have my bass lines, I have my bass fills. And then usually I will just accent it on the top with some nice. This is swung, right? Who uses groove pools? Yeah? Groove pools. So they are over here. It's like if you've ever gone down here, and they're in my sample. Whoops. Yeah. So it's these .agr files. They're essentially little grooves. That you can apply to any of your MIDI or audio. And the grooves are like presets. And they essentially they also act like MIDI information. So if you drag one of these rhythms or grooves down into your groove pool, you can either send or attach any MIDI or audio clip to it, or you can drag the groove directly onto the clip. And as you can see, again, if you're interested, I recommend, there's probably like hundreds of YouTube tutorials how to do it technically. I'm not here to give you information you can find on the internet. But basically this shaker, as you can see, I have this groove down here. It's tied to my 16th note 35 swing. It's 35 degrees swing, 16th note. If I take it off to none, I want you guys listen. I want you guys to listen and see if you can hear how straight it is before and after. So. Now I'll add swing. Who can actually hear that? Super subtle, because right now I think it's like this is too much. I can take the amount down. Maybe if I had it with a click. So none. It already has some swing inside it. So what it's doing is basically, it's like for every other note, it's pushing one of the notes back. So it's like, if it's like is straight, the delayed one will be every other one is usually delayed. That's actually the famous MPC swing. It's actually really hard to hear it on its own, but it just changes the feeling, especially if you push it more, if you have more amount up. And I'm usually applying this to like things like shakers, other percussion. Makes it really nice. I also very often will gate my shaker. And so for example, like this one, let's listen to it on its own. Do you guys know how to, actually 1 second. A lot of times I will go to this warp mode beats. So this is the normal sample, right? And I can make it tighter to leave more space for the other percussion. Wider. So this is one of the quickest ways, I think a lot of people know about this, but it's faster than a gate. Just go to your clip for any audio clip, especially really good with percussive sounds. Go to your warp mode, make sure it's beats. Select transients, and then make sure you're selecting this forward arrow. Because essentially when you do this, your scale from 100 to 0 will act like a gate. So fully open shaker, 0, tight. And when you're trying to build the energy of a track, gates and tightening a groove is a really good way to like bring everything home, right? So if I just play it with the kick, I'll actually turn down the kick so it's not too loud. I'll turn up the shaker. I want you guys to check out the feeling of this. So we have a tight shaker. I can build energy by opening up the gate. Right? So one of the best ways how to add energy to a track, volume dynamically. You can always raise volume. Adding volume will always raise the energy of a track. But if you don't do it well, you will, if you turn everything up, you run out of literally energy headroom, and you can't escalate your track. Frequency-wise, high passing is a great way to add energy. And yeah, again, with volume and envelopes and frequencies together, gates are a great way to tighten a groove. Also, if you add in, let's say, another layer of percussion, let me just add this one. Notice how if I have an open shaker, it's all of a sudden really hard to hear other elements. Right? But if I have it tight, much better. So if you have really wide percussion, try making sure that it's not always just about EQing or compressing, but literally the audio waveform, tightening it up. Oftentimes for heavily syncopated material, you want to have tighter envelopes to create space so that the ear can actually hear everything. So awesome. Great. And this is just like an accented hi-hat. I do a lot of what's called micro sampling, which is just I spend a lot of time cutting grooves. These are just 2 samples. And what I do is, one really quick hack. So as you can see, like this is 1 sample, right? Oops. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to go into the actual clip and change the start point. And what's really cool about this is if you have a sample that you got from, you know, Splice or Loops or something against the kick, this is just the sample straight as it is. That's cool, but maybe other people have that sample. What if I just offset it by 1 beat? So let's just loop a shorter version. Really quick hack, just moving around the start point. Let that sit. Offbeat. Or here. It sounds also very similar because this groove is very similar on its own. Versus, or even like this would be weird. Nah, you don't want to do that. So let's make a groove. So now let's just pretend, let me just play around. Let me show you if I'm like in production. I have these 2 samples, how I would create a groove essentially here. So let's slow it down to like 120. Okay, and then I'll loop this. I'll bring this over. Maybe I just want to take a piece.
Do you always go slower?
Sometimes if I'm, when I'm listening for, at 126, it's really hard to hear all those details between the notes. So like I might say like, actually I might even go a lot slower. Like I usually like to let the rhythm sit. So like what is this beat telling me? Boom. Okay, so if I'm listening to this beat, where is it coming? It's coming here. Got boom, space, space, got boom, busy, space, 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 busy, space. So maybe I'll put this, I don't want this, now this part is busy, right? It's fighting now, right? Do you hear how it's like, it's fighting with the kick rhythm? Let's go to 120. Like, just these 2 elements by themselves sounds okay, but with all my other elements, they're kind of fighting now. So what I would probably do is take this busy part, maybe move it to where it's more chill. So, and I don't like that. I just want to move, maybe offset this, Command E to cut. That's too busy now. Different beat though, right? A little bit. So I like that. So maybe I take this part, move it over here, shave the front, reverse it. Now we have something else, and if I want to make it more busy, maybe we take one of these ones and just randomly put it there. Maybe I'll just take this. Let's just put this here and see what it sounds like. So now it's a little bit too busy, right? Let's mute this. And I can play with this where I want the start point to be. Nope. Maybe I want it to be here. That's cool. Right? Maybe I can change this now. That's cool. But see how there's an implied rhythm now inside, and all I was doing is everything you guys know how to do is cut, paste, reverse. But the main thing is, I think maybe these loops are not the best example because they kind of, the sample repeats, but we have there's like a lot of percussion samples that are like super random, right? If you just move the start point around, it's one of the best ways to like find a nice groove and make your own groove inside it, you know? So now let's listen to the beat I had before. Sometimes I will just like Command E a section and I'll make it like a different color, like red, just so I know that part is different. But this is the groove that it was before. Now, slightly different, right? Obviously, they're going to sound similar because it's a similar groove. But that's just kind of like the workflow idea. You know, you can always do little micro sampling things like this. I can make 4. Maybe these 4, I will pitch each of these up consecutively. So maybe 2 semitones. Maybe. You know? It's just little micro sampling to add interest. And these are the things that sometimes we don't do because, yeah, so it's a little bit more work, but these are the kind of ways I like to treat audio files, whether it's a sample or something that I've recorded. But then you can add the bass line back in. Yeah, so percussive sounds, this kind of approach that I take to percussion probably spans pretty much all percussion. So whether it's djembes, shakers, hand drums, little plucky sounds, random synthesized sounds. I usually like to kind of, I guess you could call it old school, but like kind of just like this micro sampling, like doing a lot of these little variations throughout, and then adding the automation after. So let's see if there was a crazier, yeah. Any questions on that? Thoughts, comments, suggestions?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go first. Yeah. Another question to regarding your synthesizers. I like your sounds a lot, but how do you motivate yourself recording them? Because for me, it's so annoying to always play on point and like, oh, I have the feeling to place the cut off here, and I have to feel it, and then hear it again, and it sucks.
How to motivate to record synths?
Yeah, or how do you like do it to catch or keep the energy you're having while playing? You know what I mean?
Do you smoke weed?
No, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, that's not the answer, but try that. But actually, what am I allowed to say or not say on on the panel? But to be honest, usually I find that if you're recording, that's kind of like, again, going back to workflow, like I separate my process into 3 stages. The first one is the creative phase, and this is the no risk, have fun phase, right? Throw all the paint at the wall, see what happens, smoke a joint, record everything, invite your friend over, whatever, do whatever you want. The next phase is the organizational phase, that's second. And that's when you're critically listening, mixing, moving things around, being surgical. And then the last phase is just completion. So whatever that means for you, maybe it's listening to it with friends or mastering the track or whatever. But in the creative phase, The most important thing for me is to have fun. So maybe it's smoking a joint, maybe it's just jamming with friends. If it's the motivation part is your question, like that's something I can't really help you with. You know what I mean? The motivation is internal, right?
No, I mean,
So, yeah.
Compared to MIDIs.
Compared to MIDI,
Yeah, so because I prefer to work with MIDI and synthesizers, digital synthesizers, because
Totally.
I changed them afterwards, and I saw
Yeah.
you were working only with recording synthesizers.
No, I also have like, I think my bass line, this is all MIDI, it's Diva. I do both, for sure. For sure, but usually with MIDI too, you're saying you mostly use MIDI, right? Yeah, so I mean, you can also run your MIDI out, you know, into whatever synth you have. If so, then you don't have to worry about the notes themselves. Actually, I do that a lot is I usually will draw in some MIDI notes first, run it through my synth, and then I can just play with like the parameters, the filter cutoffs and stuff like that. And that's usually more fun and creative because if you're talking about playing every note, well, that's almost impossible because we don't have enough hands.
See, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
That's why I was wondering why you're recording your synthesizer, because it's so much easier to use MIDI. But now you explained it.
In that case, I almost do it in 2 steps. I almost always, if I have nothing, let's say I'm making like a bass line, I almost always will like play my bass line first. Like, okay, I like the melody or I like the bass line, and then I take the MIDI and then I route it through, and then I have, okay, I'm like turning knobs. I'm almost never playing and, you know, at the same time. Some people are really good at that, but like I usually need like a third arm, you know, so I usually do it in 2 steps like this. Yeah. And yeah, I think we have about 5-10 more minutes, so I should, instead of going through too much more, I think you guys have heard the track, is just maybe open it up to any general questions, kind of like this, or specific as well. Anything you guys want to ask at this point? Did you still have one?
My question.
Yeah, you had one, right? No?
Yeah, it was like a little one because
Hmm?
we used the gate thing on the clap, and I wanted to ask if it's similar to using just decay and putting it up because it sounded similar.
On the you mean on this shaker?
Yeah, on the shaker.
Yeah, it's the same as really any gate. Yeah, it's just essentially what it's doing is Ableton's warp mode is analyzing all of your transients, where they are placed, and this when you're in beats mode. Where was it that I changed it? I think it was this one. Whatever. When you're in beats mode, it's also analyzing like in between the 2 warp markers. How is it gonna loop? Like so when there's silent points, is it gonna loop your waveform back, forward, backwards, or just straight? And this, if it's just straight, it allows you to cut that envelope tighter, which is literally acting like a gate. You can hear it. So, yeah. Yeah. Any other general questions? Yes.
Where do you draw the line with compression? Because I just find sometimes I get so into compressors,
Nice.
just themselves, and I just like will just pump it and like overdrive them and stuff, and then I put them on fucking everything. And I'm like, why not?
So first, let's talk about what we're using the compressor for, because I think the main reasons we use a compressor is either to control dynamic range, to make something louder. What are you using it for? Which context are you talking about?
It varies. Like sometimes I use it to manipulate the sound and to pump like a beat, and then other times it's like technical in the sense of like just giving more punctuation to what I'm working with. But I find I get blurred lines quite often.
Yeah, I think my answer to all of that is actually I don't use compression very much. So if we're talking about dynamic range, like early uses of a compressor is like vocal compression, right? Let's say you have a singer come into the booth and she sings really loud during the exciting parts and she sings really soft during the quiet parts. Like a compressor will smooth that out, right? I almost never use a compressor to fix something for dynamic range. I almost always am using volume automation. I just find that is more precise. As far as making things louder, or as far as sidetraining, I almost don't ever, because I just, volume shaper. And then the third common use for compressors is, most often is squashing your signal, raising the overall volume, and making it sound fatter and bigger, right? I almost never do that now either. I know it sounds crazy to say this, but I think compression, I don't know. I feel like back in the days when it was more like you're recording bands and you had drums and guitars and stuff, and these recordings weren't perfect, and these audio signals, I think compressors were much more useful for that. I think these days, like I said, all your splice samples are compressed, limited. A lot of times the sound coming out of even your virtual instrument is like pretty even. You're rarely running into many situations where you're confronted with an uneven sound source. More often than not, it's an EQ problem. And even though I'm not like a huge, oh, this is being recorded, right? So I shouldn't. I like Boris Brejcha, but you know, I'm not like a huge Boris Brejcha fan. But I've watched some of his tutorials, and he talks all the time. And this guy's got the cleanest mixes like ever, right? And he talks about how he doesn't use compression. And that kind of validated me. I mean, that was like a year ago or so. He's like, yeah, I almost rarely compress because more often than not, me and a lot of friends of mine, you think you have to use compression because you hear about it, again, on YouTube or in tutorials and whatever. But with electronic music, more often than not, the only time I'm really using compression is if it is modeled after kind of it's modeled after some vintage gear, so it's more for color. If it's like a vintage compressor to add some iron to your signal, for sure, like it's making it warmer, it's crunching it in a certain way. If I wanted to add color, I'm definitely using a compressor. But for a sterile, clean compressor, like the glue, like the glue should have color, but the basic compressor in Ableton or the sterile, clean Fab Filter, I'm not really using it for. I'm not really using compressors for cleaning anything up, but for creative stuff, I am. Yeah, adding color. There was one more, right? Someone in the back?
More of a basic question.
Sure.
Like a fun question.
Yeah.
Maybe give us your top 3 or top 5 plugins you use.
Ooh, okay. Let's see. I have to take a look first. Well, also you guys are meeting me at a very special time in my life. I have been on a production break for almost a month and a half. Since I got to Berlin, I've been nonstop producing, but since the club's opened, I've actually been able to work as a DJ, which has been nice. So I was doing that. I would say right off the bat, Sound Toys. Decapitator, super important. I use the Filter Freak a lot. For synths, I use Diva a lot. I can just take you through here. I use a lot of definitely the Valhalla reverbs. Often go for the Valhalla Vintage Verb. Let's just go here. Also, if you have a more specific question, like what plugins I use for certain things, you can also ask as well. Usually for synths, it ends up being Diva and Serum. Delays, I really like the H delay from Waves. And also Echo Boy. Echo Boy Sound Toys is just, it's an instrument. Reverbs, like here I said, going for Valhalla usually. I really like the transient shaper from Isotope, which just helps me shape sounds as I like them. And then also very often, Contact, right? I mean, it's kind of an easy, I don't know if that's a good example, but Contact is like, it's where I usually source a lot of my organic sounds. Actually, I have one more sound maybe I'll show before we're done. But I have this, a lot of times I will use Contact, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's essentially like a sample player. And it's, they multi-sample real instruments, and then they make it in a library that's available for you to play with MIDI notes. One of my favorite ones is this Contact instrument called, it's a hand pan one, pan drums, right? So normally, let me just duplicate this one more time. Actually, no, let's just use the normal. So this hand pan, I will initialize it. So it's, you guys know what hand pans are? I'm gonna go to the instrument. So this instrument is actually supposed to be a hand pan. So if I go to, if I just initialize it and I play it, right? So we have, right? It's a virtual instrument for this. But then I think what I did was I added a delay to it. I think I made it a little bit higher. So it was like this sound. Pitched it up, you know what I mean? The sustain's very low. But if you move the attack back, it sounds kind of like a flute. And basically what I did is I just have all these, I think I just drew in, either I held down a note or I held down 16th notes. Let's see. Yeah, it's just this one long note. So there's like an arpeggiator running. And that's just really for atmosphere. So you have it with this. Yeah. So contact is a big one. But other than that, let me see if there's any. PSP Vintage Warmer. Maybe I'll just leave you that one. PSP Vintage Warmer. Who asked me about compression earlier, right? PSP. Is there another lecture after me, or if I'm going a few minutes over, is it okay? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So PSP Vintage Warmer. Who knows what that is? PSP Vintage Warmer 2. It's really amazing. Maybe this is just one I will. So usually I use it. I usually use either this one or Decapitator. And I wish I could make this bigger. I guess on this I can't. It's basically a limiter. And so you can drive the signal. Let's put this on maybe just the bass line. So it's very confusing because the knee is not your normal knee like in a compressor. It actually adds distortion as you go higher. The speed is actually audio quality, so the lower it is, the more it's actually emulating like kind of like tape saturation, and it's more distorted, and the drive is a drive. And usually when I use this, I'll turn the mix down maybe to 50 for parallel compression, and then you see how it adds a lot of strong harmonics? Then I would have to go in, and by the way, it's going to be impossible to mix right now because the monitors are facing away from me, but usually you hear that resonance point that is this one. That's better, right? So after I boost with this, I usually will EQ something out. There's a lot of resonance, but PSP, it just makes everything a little warmer. It's kind of emulating tape saturation. And basically tape saturation is just, back in the day when they recorded to tape, you know, when you drive the signal and the signal becomes really hot, on the tape, the oxide particles react and get excited, and that creates that euphonic warm sound right? That warm sound that we all talk about. And those excited oxide particles basically will just like jump around and basically introduce that nice warm fuzz that we all love in vintage gear, and that's basically the math that is in this plugin. And usually when my tracks are sounding a little bit too sterile, clean, or generic, I just put this on a lot of like, for Decapitator and this, on a lot of percussion, on a lot of drums. It's a lot of inharmonic content. Sounds really good. Yeah. Any last questions? Final thoughts? Yes.
What's your favorite techniques for placing an element in the stereo
As far as a plugin or just techniques? So maybe I'll just show you one with a plugin as well, really fast. But I use the S1 Imager from Waves because you can basically, like here, I will just map. I will map the, what is this one? So the asymmetry, group the imager, map the asymmetry to one macro, map the rotation to another macro, and then I will use an LFO. I'm just doing quick stuff here, so don't worry if you don't understand. Map to here. Maybe I'll slow down the rate. So what this basically does is it maps the rotational axis and the symmetrical axis. And if I separate the degrees, you know, I can play with it like more, I have more control. It's really nice. And as far as techniques, I wouldn't say there's techniques. It's more, again, the concept of the lower the frequency, right? It's this upside down triangle or tree. The lower the frequency bass kick, the more center it will sound because your brain is more sensitive to lower frequencies in mono, in the middle of the stereo field. And then the higher the frequencies go, the more I can spread them around. Usually I like to be sort of random, and I also, like not just random, but I like to have things at different rates. Like I don't want everything moving at eighth notes. I like to have something slower and something faster, and it just, for me, that's something that's like, it makes it feel real, I guess. But yeah, as long as you're kind of generally sticking to like the lower the frequency, higher the frequency, the more wider it is, that's a good place to start. Yeah. Okay. Last thoughts, anything else? Okay, thank you so much. That was my masterclass. All right, cool.